All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is John, and I want to welcome you to Sit Heads Meditation Club. Sit Heads is a sitting and social group for people interested in deep meditation practice. Everything we do is free and donation-based. If you want to hang out with us, you can find us at sit-heads.com. We meet every Thursday to meditate together and talk about practice. We do not have a set teacher, but we do have visiting teachers join us from time to time, like tonight's guest, Tina Rasmussen. Let's see. As I said, everything is free and donation based. And on that note, if you enjoy tonight's session, you get some benefit from it, I want to encourage you to offer dana to our guest teacher. So dana is a word in the Pali language that refers to donations given in the spirit of generosity and gratitude for these wonderful teachings. With all of that logistical stuff out of the way, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce the incomparable Tina Rasmussen. Tina has been meditating for 45 years. She was authorized to teach by the great Burmese master, Pa Auk Sayadaw. And in 2007, Tina became the first Western woman whom Pa Auk Sayadaw authorized to teach. So she is something of a pioneer. She's the co-author of the book Practicing the Jhanas, which I happen to know at least one sit head is currently reading right now, and was very excited to hear that Tina was joining us for that reason. Tina has also studied extensively with the Tibetan Dzogchen master, Sokni Rinpoche, who just happens to be one of my Dzogchen teachers. So that was exciting for me. She combines deep knowledge of both Theravada Buddhist and Tibetan Buddhist practice, which I think is rare and very special. So I'm really glad that she's here with us. Tina, is there anything that you want to say before we get started?
Just thank you for the invitation. I love everything that you're doing. It's so wonderful.
Thank you so much.
I was really tickled to hear you talking about all of that and knowing that people can benefit from it. So
thanks, Tina. I really appreciate that. And I'm really glad that you're here with us. So the way this works, for those of you who haven't been here before, is Tina and I are going to chat for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes till roughly the hour mark. I find that helps to seed the Q&A with ideas for sorts of things you might want to ask about. Plus, it's fun for me, which is nice. And then after we're done with that conversation, we'll open it up for the next hour after that to the group for Q&A, and we'll talk about how that'll go when it's time for that. So Tina, does that all sound all right with you?
Sounds great, John.
All right, so let's begin. And actually one thing that we talked about when you and I spoke, just the two of us a few days ago, was I love the way that we were really having a conversation. It was like very organic. It was super fun, at least for me.
It was fun for me too.
Good. And, I feel like sometimes when I do this, it turns inevitably into just a private Q&A where I just sort of ask questions and the teacher answers. And I want us to aim for capturing the spirit of that conversation we had before, where it doesn't go like that, but it's actually more of a conversation, because I thought a lot of great things came out of that. I think it might be my fault for phrasing everything as a question. So I'm going to experiment. I'm going to try and just sort of
we'll experiment
like I did before, and we'll see. I might accidentally slip into Q&A mode, but let's see what happens.
Okay.
All right. So one thing that I really appreciate, we didn't actually talk about this, but one thing that I really appreciate about you is the way that you sort of go to bat for Samatha and for Jhana, because I feel like sometimes Samatha practice, and for anyone who doesn't know, Samatha refers to what you might call concentration practice or focused attention practice that really emphasizes the quality of non-distraction. And often, I guess not always technically, but often involves using one particular anchor, like the breath, for instance, and using that to stabilize your attention. Just for anyone who's not familiar with the term. The word jhana refers to a deep stage of samatha practice in which you become essentially absorbed in the object, a very deep concentration state. So having put that gotten that out of the way, I feel like oftentimes in many traditions, samatha is sort of given second-class status. Not in all of them, but I know that in the sort of insight traditions, it's often sort of, it's optional. It can even be a sidetrack. You don't want to get too attracted to it. You should really just do vipassana. Like, don't worry about that. Just do vipassana, do insight meditation, you'll be fine. And then in the Dzogchen tradition, at least my experience with it, there's a similar thing of, yeah, samatha, do it until you can do Dzogchen. It's a beginner's thing. And don't do absorptions, right? That'll get you stuck in some sort of weird afterlife forever after you die, right? You'll be some sort of weird meditation god frozen in samadhi. So I really appreciate that you have said there's a real respect in your teaching for samatha, and a view of it as offering deep, quite Buddhist benefits, right? Awakening related benefits, instead of it being some ancillary thing separate from insight or awakening. And you even equate jhana with non-dual experience. I haven't heard that before.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and I should say, I practiced vipassana for 20 years before I even knew about samatha. So I've actually been practicing vipassana a lot longer. So I think that's a great practice, and I believe in it too. So to me, there's no conflict. Really, it's about what the Buddha said and taught. And scholars and historians, of which I am not one, I really come from the practitioner, standpoint, but they have said that 60 to 80% of the suttas, when the Buddha said, I was asked how to practice, he talked about samatha. And really, there's only one or two suttas that really say, now just go straight to vipassana. So it is an option. It's a valid option. And the teacher who authorized me, Pa Auk Sayadaw, who's extremely well respected as a scholar and a yogi, he also has that in his progression, that yes, it is possible to go straight to vipassana. So it's not to say that isn't an option, but if you really look at what the Buddha said and what he did, he, first of all, when he left on his journey, he was taught samatha. That's what his two teachers taught him. And, it predates him. And he added vipassana to that, but he kept practicing samatha his whole life. He didn't stop when he discovered or invented, however you want to look at it, vipassana. He kept doing samatha like a lot. And then at the moment of his death, when he was, he knew he was going to die, he was precognitive, he could have done any practice. What practice did he do? He didn't do vipassana, he did samatha.
Always going up and down the jhanas, that guy.
Yeah. So why did he do it? Well, we can't ask him, unless some of you have abilities that we don't know about. But clearly, it's irrefutable that this is what happened. Nobody disputes that. So to me, the Buddha as an example is extremely compelling. If it was so rudimentary, why was he practicing it all the time?
Yeah. It does say jhana, jhana, jhana all throughout the suttas all the time.
It's all the time. It's constant. It's constant. If you actually read the suttas, you cannot, there's no way you can say this, he thought this was an optional or side practice. And then the other thing is the Hindu tradition, of which I practiced some when I was younger. If you look at the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which is one of the main texts in that tradition, that is the main practice they have that leads to awakening meditatively. So, you've got a tradition that's still alive today where this is the practice that leads to awakening. That's what the Buddha learned, basically. They didn't have like Hinduism then, but so to me, it's like, how can we ignore that?
So would you say, okay, so this is interesting to me because that's actually a pretty radical position, I think, for a Buddhist teacher. So I think the standard Buddhist position that I hear is, yes, the Buddha learned learned various absorption states from his two meditation teachers. And you know, he left them because that wasn't enough. And I feel like the standard party line within Buddhism is jhana is a pre-Buddhist technique, which the Buddha mastered with the help of teachers. And then he added some other thing that was the Buddha's unique contribution. And oftentimes what's said is that that extra thing that he added was vipassana, mindfulness, take whatever framing you want, but that's essentially, I hear that all the time. I've read that all the time.
I'm not disagreeing with that at all.
Okay.
You know, I'm just saying that if it was so ancillary though, why did he keep doing it himself?
Yeah.
I mean, we can't, you know, there are scholars that feel that the Samatha was actually his favorite practice. You know, I don't know whether it was or not, but if you actually look at what he said and taught and practiced himself, it's hard to just say, oh, he just thought this was a thing he did when in his junior years and went on. He didn't go on. He kept doing it and doing it and doing it. So if you really look at what he said and what he did, why would we do something other than what the Buddha did?
Yeah.
It makes no sense. It makes no sense logically, you know? So to me, that's part of what's compelling. You can't get away from that. Nobody's saying in the suttas that that is inaccurate. It's just that certain suttas have been lifted out and focused on. In the sea of suttas, these two suttas that talk about only doing vipassana, dry insight, have been pulled out. And I'm not saying they aren't valid. They are totally valid, and that's an option. But that, you know, it's not the majority of what the Buddha said. It's just not historically. So, you know, it's a little hard to reconcile that when you really look at it. I think, you know, there are reasons why the Samatha got relegated to the back rooms for monastics that were already in the first stage of awakening. And those reasons, you know, there are those reasons, but that's not what the Buddha taught. Yeah. So, and a lot of the Western teachers, they went over and they were only taught vipassana because the Samatha was being saved for more advanced, you know, people. So they came and they taught what they learned, which makes sense.
And it's interesting because you definitely encounter different perspectives among Western teachers. So you will certainly encounter the sort of maybe IMS derived line of teaching where it really is vipassana from the jump, right? And then maybe play with jhana later after you know, stream entry or something like that. And not to put words in their mouth, I don't want to be reductive, but then you'll have people like, for instance, the late Chuladasa, who would suggest that there's almost not much sense in bothering with vipassana until you've done a fair amount of samatha. So there are all these different perspectives, and the truth is we see people getting awakened in all these different ways. So
exactly, yeah, they're all valid paths, but you know, the Buddha, if you look at what the Buddha and others said at the time, that there were, even in his day, there were samatha yogis and vipassana yogis, and the Buddha felt it was best to be both a samatha and vipassana yogi, not to be one or the other. It's really clear. Yeah. You know, so why are we saying no, he was wrong? We're really going to just do this.
Well, we know better, Tina. We're modern day people, and we know better now.
Right.
So
well, we are, and Western, you know, people, we want to just get to the finish line as fast as possible. But really, if you're doing vipassana at a certain level, you need at least a high level of access concentration to really do vipassana at a liberative level. So why not, you know, it's, if you look at what these are doing to our consciousness, to me, samatha is like weightlifting. And and vipassana is more like running, cardio. And you're going to be a better, faster runner if you have strong leg muscles. So even if samatha isn't your main practice, why wouldn't you do it just to be able to do vipassana better?
Yeah, just hit the gym every now and then.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
That's an interesting perspective, which gets us to where I kind of wanted to go next, which is let's talk about the practicalities of it. And then I want to stop talking about samatha because your teachings go so far beyond that. I don't want to inadvertently give the impression that it's just samatha, samatha, samatha with you, which I know that it isn't. But I did just want to talk about it because I thought your perspective on it is so unique and interesting. But okay, so you're making the case here that kind of samatha is for everyone, right? If you're a vipassana yogi, you should consider doing samatha. If you're a Dzogchen yogi, you should definitely consider samatha. I mean, I know our mutual teacher, Sokni Rinpoche, straight up does teach and
He
recommend.
emphasizes it a lot more than some. Yeah, but you know, in Dzogchen, I've been to advanced Dzogchen retreats where basically people who were realizing Rigpa and had access to non-duality, they were having to come back to the samatha because it wasn't stable.
Couldn't stabilize
they
it.
couldn't realize for more than just a second here and there. So, you know, it's samatha, it's always good, whether it's your main practice, whether it's a support for other things. We need to be able to stay with our object.
So here's my question then. Let's get practical, because another thing that I appreciate about you is your willingness to give very concrete and sometimes even numerically specific guidance. That is rare, I think, among teachers. Like I heard you say things like, not realistic for you to expect jhana in daily life practice. That is just sort of a blunt truth that you delivered bluntly. And I mean, people may disagree. I'm not here to arbitrate that discussion, but I really appreciate that you just sort of said that. You just sort of put that on the table. Look, here's the deal. And you know, you talked about how if you took 2 weeks of retreat, that's probably enough to see if you have capacity for jhana. I appreciate just how precise you are. You know, you talked about 30 minutes being a good amount for me. You'll put numbers on things, which I think many teachers are loath to do. And I'm sure it needs to be understood within the context of course, everyone's different, but that doesn't mean that you can't give broad rules of thumb, which I appreciate. So if you are a vipassana yogi who is set on achieving stream entry through the traditional, let's say, Mahasi type route of cessation, right? Going through the various stages of insight meditation, resulting in Magapala, path and fruit cessation. What role should samatha play? Should you be doing always a little bit of samatha every day? Should you really be focusing on vipassana as your sole practice, and then every now and then do a little samatha sprint for a week or something to sharpen it up? What do you recommend actually in terms of specifically how a vipassana yogi should incorporate samatha into their daily practice? I'd be curious for the same to ask you the same question about Dzogchen practitioners.
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I practiced vipassana mainly for decades before I even knew about samatha, so I can totally relate to that. No one was really talking about samatha then, so I did that in the Brahmaviharas, but I get it. There's the dry insight path, and as we know from the Buddha, it's valid to just do that, never do samatha, so that's an option. What I've noticed is that there's a reason they call it dry insight. I mean,
I do know that, actually. Yes.
Yeah, that name isn't arbitrary, and I think they called it dry insight in the day of the Buddha. I mean, this isn't it's dry, and the juicy side of the practice is samatha. And when people are doing samatha, it's hard. It's a hard practice, because whatever your patterns are, you are going to see them glaringly in samatha. Glaringly, but it's juicy. It offsets the dryness.
I'm gonna stand up. I'm gonna stand up for bare vipassana or dry vipassana a little bit here.
Okay.
Because and then I got a question asking for some clarification, because we are talking at kind of a more sophisticated level. So Maybe I'll take a step back in a second, but there are times doing so-called dry vipassana where it is extremely juicy, where there's lots of bliss and joy and energy. So I don't want to, I feel like I gotta.
I agree. I mean, I totally agree. And the jhana factors can arise in vipassana. So that's absolutely true. And again, I practiced vipassana for decades for Samatha, and I experienced exactly what you're talking about. But there is, like, it's called dry insight.
Oh, there's a lot.
So So there's a way that I mean, it's a completely valid path. I'm not saying that I believe it's not valid. We know it's valid because people wake up from it, and because the Buddha said people could wake up from it. So,
yeah.
But if so there are people who want to do that, and that's fine. Then they don't need to even think about samatha. Yeah. But if somebody wants to increase their concentration level, you could, I've had 20, 30 year, 40 year Vipassana practitioners come to 1-2 week samatha retreat and be like, oh, I had more insight on this retreat than I ever did in a Vipassana retreat. And then they go back to Vipassana. Some of them stay with samatha for a year or two.
Yeah.
It depends, but even doing one samatha retreat just for the sake of doing the heavy weightlifting and getting that muscle in our consciousness activated can help. Okay. I mean, I've had people whose teachers have told them to come because their concentration was terrible, and they thought this will never improve. And by the end of the retreat, their concentration had improved. Mm-hmm. So, even to do it just like you're going to do a deep dive and then go back to Vipassana, that can be really helpful. Okay. One could do a few months of samatha practice and daily sitting if you don't want to go to retreat to do it. I mean, the brain research shows these are doing different things to our consciousness. Sorry,
is there a concern there? Because I'll tell you what springs to my mind when I hear you say that, and it's absolutely just an emotional reaction. And I don't think necessarily one that I should run with. But when I hear you say, take a few months off and do samatha, my immediate thought is like, but my precious progress. That's what immediately comes to mind is, oh, my faculties, my Vipassana faculties, won't they degrade and so on and so forth? Do you feel that's not like, would you say that's an overblown concern?
Well, everyone gets to be the master of their own practice. So that's the good news, is that, these days we're not committed to a teacher who's guiding us and we have to do what they say like it was, in the old days. So yeah. You all get to decide. In the Ajahn Chah tradition, which there's a paper out called The Honed and Heavy Axe, which is written by one of the the monk who runs the New Zealand monastery, Ajahn Chah. When he first started teaching, he met with the most senior people under Ajahn Chah because he wanted to find out what they had done. All of them had attained jhana, all of them. None of them talked about it. Ajahn Chah could go into jhana at one breath, which he did frequently. Never talked about it because they can't talk about it because they're monastics. They can't talk about their attainments. Can't talk about but in the Ajahn Chah lineage, it's 2 feet up the mountain. That's how he described it, 2 feet up the mountain. It's not dry insight. That's not what any of the advanced people that he met with did. None of them, not one.
Interesting, really interesting.
So, in the Burmese tradition, there's more, like in the Mahasi Upandita lineage, they were more go for the dry insight and then learn the jhanas if you have capacity, doing the Brahmaviharas after the first stage of awakening.
Right.
That's how they did it. So,
and a very retreat oriented style too, right? They were like, hole up on retreat for a month, crank out your stream entry, and then get your feet wet.
Right. And then you have Pa Auk, where he also separated them out. Mm-hmm. He separates out the samatha and the vipassana. So, these are in different ways, but in the Ajahn Chah lineage, 2 feet up the mountain, that's more how I teach it. Because, and I'm now teaching samatha and vipassana in harmony what does that really mean, and going through the different ways this is seen. But I've seen it that like when people get stuck in samatha, what they do is what I teach is they apply vipassana. They investigate. And what do we do in vipassana when we're lost? We come back to the breath. So we're already, we're sort of already doing that. It doesn't have to be an either or. The Buddha did not make it an either or ever. So I don't know why we're doing that now. It's not what the Buddha taught at all.
Yeah.
We're overlaying that based on some kind of, I don't know. Well, I do. There are reasons why, but it just isn't what he taught.
Yeah, there are, I think, historical reasons and some other things going on there. Cool. Well, I want to take a second because someone sent me a message basically saying, hey, can you explain a bit more for us newbies? When I sit, I'm just trying to keep my focus on the breath while my mind continues to wander. Does that get to samatha? So just very briefly, if you think about something like bringing your attention to the breath, noticing when you get distracted, bringing your attention back, and having the primary focus of the meditation essentially being non-distraction, remaining with the object, I think we would call that samatha practice. Would you say that's right, Tina?
Well, if you're noticing the breath at the belly, that's a mindfulness of the body. So technically it's not samatha. That will never lead to jhana, no matter how good you are at it.
Okay, so let's say breath at the nose then, but just to draw a distinction for the newer folks, you could think of vipassana as more of an investigative endeavor, where you are trying to see clearly each moment of your experience, right? And different components of your experience, the sensory components of it, the pleasantness or unpleasantness of it, the mental states that accompany them, various other elements called dhammas, which are a bit more complicated, but it's a moment-to-moment investigation.
Right, we're really exploring, we're getting in there and being curious about every little detail of what's happening and tracking it quickly. Yeah.
Whereas in samatha, I think we are less interested in investigating the nature of things and more about coming to, maybe stillness isn't the right word, but collecting the mind in a way that leads to these deep states of serenity.
In samatha, what we're doing is we're orienting toward the mystery that's beyond materiality and mentality. We aren't investigating, we're going into the formlessness.
Yeah.
That is what we're orienting to and penetrating with a laser-like awareness.
Yeah, so I hope that's somewhat clarifying for people, because I know we're bandying around terms very in a very like chill way, as if everyone knows what this is. Also, I think we didn't define Dzogchen, so would you be willing to give a 30-second? I know that's hard to do. Dzogchen is such a profound practice. It is the great perfection.
It's like the pinnacle of all of Tibetan Buddhism, the Nyingma lineage. Yeah.
But, if you had to, what would the elevator pitch for Dzogchen?
Yeah, it's the great perfection. It's considered the pinnacle practice in the Nyingma lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, which is the oldest lineage. It uses building blocks. So it starts with the heart practice of bodhicitta, and then you go to shamatha with and without support, which is similar to samatha and similar to vipassana. And then there's a certain kind of vipassana that's different than what we have in the Theravada lineage. And then we try to realize non-duality directly. We're actually, trying to cultivate the capacity to have momentary tastes and then gradually have those become more, continuous, to realize rigpa, which is what it's called, which is one of the boundless dimensions of non-duality that can be realized, and then to stabilize that so that we can live from it. Thank you.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's very hard to summarize it for someone who isn't familiar with it already, and frankly, even for someone who is. But I hope that's somewhat helpful. I think non-duality was a really key word there. The transcend, for people who don't know, in this particular context, I think it's referring to a few things, but I think primarily the idea of transcending the sense of subject and object, the sense of there being a you over here and a perceiver over here and a perceived over there, the collapsing of that distinction into, I think, what they sometimes call the fundamental ground of our being, or the ground of reality. It is the sort of most cherished pinnacle practice within that particular school of Tibetan Buddhism. It is a really beautiful and deceptively simple practice. Deceptively simple, because it's not actually, it's so simple that it's damn hard, is how
yeah, exactly.
Well, all right, that's enough nattering on from me, but I really enjoyed this conversation, Tina. I hope you and I get to have many more conversations, because they've all been a blast for me.
Yeah, me too, John.
But let me not hog your time. So let's open it up to Q&A now, if that's okay with you, Tina.
Sure.
All right, so that's the deal. And a couple quick things about Q&A. Let's please keep the questions practice oriented rather than being highly theoretical. One question per person, please. Let's try and avoid multi-part questions. And then if that way, everyone who has a question can ask their one. And then if we're able to come back around again to you, we will. Please keep your questions concise. Do as I say, not as I do. I know I'm a bit of a talker. Don't be like me. Try and be concise. If sharing some part of your spiritual biography is integral or necessary to convey your question, go ahead, but do try and keep that as concise as possible and only as needed. That way everyone gets the chance to talk. Great. Let's do this. Ben, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, that would be great. Tina, thank you so much for being here with us.
Sure. Nice to meet you, Ben.
Meet you. My question is around sort of excitement during like concentration practice, where I have found that over the course of many years, I frequently get kind of stuck in a cycle of getting to a very sort of brief moment of stillness that is followed by the thought, oh my God, yes, I'm doing it, which like immediately takes me back out of it. I was wondering if you had any sort of advice or thoughts on getting over that hump other than hitting the wall over and over again.
Yeah. Are you knowing that experientially, or are there words in your head, or what's going on when the excitement happens?
It is the thought that crosses through my mind. Almost. Yeah.
Okay. And if you notice that as it's a fun hindrance to have, or defilement, whatever we want to say it is. But if you notice it as that, does that allow you to then go back, or what happens? Have you tried that?
I would describe it as kind of a loop where I have the thought, it gets me up in my head thinking, oh, how great this is going, and a lot of mental chatter, and I return and I calm back down, and then it kind of flips back in.
Yeah. Well, with concentration, whether it's samatha or vipassana or any other practice, there's 5 factors that support it. And the first 2 are applying our attention, and the second one is sustained attention, where it stays. So, it sounds like when you get to that point of applying the attention and starts sustaining, it's during the sustained part that you then get excited and then have to reapply your attention. Is that kind of what's happening? Yeah. So and I didn't say this before, but the word samatha actually doesn't mean concentration. It means concentration and serenity. Samadhi is the word that means concentration. So it's really important, and people regularly forget that samatha is concentration and serenity. So one thing that can help with the serenity part is to sometimes notice the serenity, like between the in-breath and the out-breath on the pause. That can be a place to actually notice the serenity, that all you're doing is You know, I mean, you're not saying this to yourself, and you don't have to leave the breath to notice the serenity, because the serenity is part of the breath. I mean, the breath is keeping us alive, it's soothing. So to notice the serenity at the pause sometimes could maybe help really sink into the restful part. This is why we don't have investigation in samatha in part. There's a lot of reasons. One is to go beyond conceptual, thinking, but to really feel that kind of settling into the serenity might help just have that sustained attention last longer. That would be my suggestion. Have you ever tried anything like that, or?
Nothing specifically like that. I will.
Okay. Yeah. So that would be my encouragement, is to, if you notice, first of all, if you notice that you're getting into striving, which can happen a lot with samatha, it's a big thing for almost everybody who has to work with it. And then you find that you're staying with it, that could be part of where it's great to be excited about the practice. I'm glad that there's a joy in that is really helpful. But I think if you include the serenity part of the practice, that might be enough to offset to where you can settle in such a way that excitement, because excitement can come up without taking us off of the breath. There can be a sense of joy in the practice and so on that doesn't actually take you away from the object. It could be included, just like you might hear a sound in the room, but not go to that as your object. So that would be the way, to let yourself have the joy and so on, but you don't have to leave the object for that to be part of it. And the serenity might help offset that a little.
Yeah, thanks. That's very helpful. I think you're right.
Yeah.
The word striving is probably a very big part of that.
Right. Because then when you get there, then you're excited, but then you're not there anymore. So, this is part of samatha. It lets us settle into our deeper nature potentially.
Thank you very much,
Yeah,
Tina.
you're welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Tina.
Sure.
Man, that one really resonated for me. Very familiar with that phenomenon. Oh, wow, it's all pristine, perfect stillness. Well, now it's not. Yeah. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. Sean, you want to ask your question?
Sure. So, earlier, I think when you're talking with John, you were saying that Samatha was sort of oriented towards I don't remember exactly what, maybe sort of nothingness or something like that, or it becomes sort of non-conceptual. And I guess when I practice concentration, I feel like I'm usually if I'm concentrating on my breath, I'm kind of creating something almost, or I'm watching my breath. So I'm curious if it's does that just eventually become, as you keep concentrating, does that just sort of naturally become less conceptual, or feel less I don't know, kind of creating something in your mind?
You're in the samatha, we're not investigating, just like John said. That's not the main faculty we're cultivating. What we're cultivating is the ability to, a lot of things, but one of them is the ability to place our attention somewhere and then stay there and rest there. And so the actual technical instructions, so I'm just going to say this because it does end up being important. You talked about watching the breath. You're actually knowing the breath. Knowing it. So we can actually know, watching means I'm doing this. There's me and I'm watching the breath, and we can actually know the breath as the breath from within the breath. So that would be, it's a small pointer, but it actually can change how you practice to know it from within it. And it could be a spot, it could be a region. And we're resting there. What we're actually orienting towards is the mystery. We're orienting toward the formless, towards the unconditioned, not to the body, not to materiality, not to our thoughts. Obviously, we don't care about investigating that. We're orienting toward the mystery that is beyond the physical. And And part of what happens is that as we really settle into that stillness, which is really one of the main characteristics of the unconditioned, of the deathless, of the absolute, our concentration can get so strong that the me thins and can go dormant. It goes dormant in a full jhana absorption. But even without that, there's a huge thinning to where basically the constant narrative that keeps the me going can subside more. So I mean, all meditations are trying to do that. The way Samatha does it is through concentration and serenity. So so that would be my pointer, would be to see if you can know the breath and relax. And all we're doing is being in the present moment. That's another really important thing to remember. This, just like vipassana, just like every valid meditation, in my opinion, is a present moment practice. And what we're doing is the breath, we can't really know the breath unless we're in the present moment. So we're using the breath as an object to get out of our habitual thought patterning that creates the me, and to orient it towards what's beyond the physical and our mental state.
Thanks. Yeah, that definitely gives me something to try next time.
Okay, good. Yeah, knowing the breath. See if you can know it, and you don't even have to be separate from it, because your consciousness that's knowing it is right there at the breath.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you, Tina.
Sure.
Andrew, go ahead.
Hey, Tina. Nice to meet you.
You too, Andrew.
I'm going to try and keep this not super conceptual, John, I promise. So if I'm too up in the clouds, feel free to land the plane, Tina. I'm at a kind of a weird point in my practice where, just given the pandemic and everything over the last however long it's been, I've been very opportunistic about working with, like, going on retreat or working with the teacher wherever I got the opportunity to. And that's been very helpful in some ways, but it's left me at a place now where I frankly just feel confused, because I've worked with teachers in sort of a grab bag of traditions at this point, you know, whether it's like Mahasi or Dzogchen or Thai Forest or something else. And my question at a very practical level that hopefully I'm not the only one dealing with this, is how, when you're in that situation, how do you find your path forward? Because I have this massive buffet in front of me and I have like a paradox of choice problem.
Right. It's one of the great treasures and problems of our era, is that we can go on the internet and get the best teachings that used to be hidden. You'd have to stand outside a monastery for a month just to get, some shred of anything. So
good problem to have.
Right. Yeah. So it's a wonderful problem. We're the first generation that's had that. And it is a problem because we can become like a stone just skipping across the top of the water and never going deep. And that is the downside of it. So I recommend that if somebody's going to do a practice, that they commit to it for a month. I don't recommend skipping all over every day. Well, this isn't going so well, so now I'm going to go to that. That doesn't challenge our personality patterns if we just skip around whenever practice gets hard, which is easy to do, So to give a practice a chance to let it deepen and to really get to know it, I think is a good way to come to any practice that you're really serious about. I mean, it's fine to do day-longs and experiment, but if you don't want to be just every day, just randomly doing a bunch of different things, nothing can land like that. Another way, like my teachings really these days are centered around the 4 categories of neuroscience that are being studied, which is heart-based practice, focused attention, which is Samatha, open monitoring, which is vipassana, and self-transcending, which is Dzogchen. The heart-based include bodhicitta and the Brahma-viharas. And it's just like physical exercise, where really for us to be well-rounded, for me, I'm really about teaching awakening. That's what I'm interested in, is helping people with that. To have all 4 is going to be, we could pick one and do that our whole life, just like if you're a weightlifter and you don't want to do cardio. or a runner and you don't want to do weights, but really we're going to be the most well-rounded to do all of them. So, you know, if you can think about the practices that, well, like, okay, what category are they in? And what do I gravitate to? What am I really good at? What do I lean towards? It's good to cultivate that, maybe start with what is your natural thing. But at some point, we're gonna get a flat spot, you know, if we just keep working, in my opinion, and if you look at the neuroscience, these are doing different things. To round ourselves out and maybe undertake a period where you say, okay, now I'm going to go and explore this for a while, even though it wouldn't be my first natural tendency or first choice, or it's harder for me because it's harder. And why is it harder? You know, what is it in my consciousness that's stuck there? So, you know, and then within the traditions, I'm not a fundamentalist really about anything, especially, you know, tradition, like I'm authorized in the Pa Auk lineage. So that's what I teach. That's what I practice. I don't do a survey course, but like in vipassana, to me, there are places for both noting and noticing, you know, Burmese and Thai forest. There's each of them can bring something really useful. So if you're going to different ones, to understand what is similar and what's different and what each of those bring, and then maybe, you know, try them out. And then, like I was saying to John, at some point we do figure out our own practice because we have these choices. I mean, most teachers, I teach more of a survey thing because I'm not a fundamentalist. And I'm not saying you should only just do this one thing. You know, most teachers will try to get you to do their thing. So that makes it hard because when you're going to them, they may not really know other practices or be able to help you locate where you are. So we have to do this on our own. I mean, this is what I'm trying to do with my What is Awakening teaching. But the 4 neuroscience categories are a way to understand it more scientifically.
Thank you. And just very clear, just one bit of clarification. You mentioned noting versus noticing in Mahasi or Thai forest. What's the difference?
Yeah, so in the Mahasi tradition, it's more frequently pointed to when things are arising in awareness in vipassana, to use a mental note like planning or pleasant or you know, pain or, you know, whatever. We don't want to spend too much time thinking about what the note is, but it's that as a way of connecting us to our experience. And in the Thai forest tradition, they use more of a noticing, where you're not using the note. Ultimately, if one goes far enough in vipassana, you can't go fast enough using the noting, but for some people, it can be helpful to really connect you with the object in a way that it gets you closer to it. So for some people, that's helpful. For others, it's too clunky, but that's the difference. Well, there's a lot of differences, but that's one of the differences in the 2 traditions and how they teach it.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Tina.
Sure.
And just to clarify that a little bit, you're referring essentially to a mental word, right? That's noting is verbal in the mind as
Right.
You're describing it, and noticing is nonverbal. Would you say that's accurate?
Right.
Okay. Thanks.
Just like in Samatha, you can use counting. In Brahma Viharas, you can use the phrases. All of those are just supports for the actual object.
Mm-hmm.
So each practice has its version of that.
All right. Well, thanks for that, Tina. Willeen, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. Hi, Tina. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Willeen.
I wanted to just ask if you could just describe, if you had one practice, a meditation practice that you could choose that you feel like would have the biggest impact in that would just feel like that would bring you to the most presence, to the most, that, you know, would have the biggest chance of bringing you to samadhi. what practice would you choose? If you could pick one, if you could just like, yeah, just describe like one practice that you would pick out of all the different.
Well, you said one thing there that gave me some pointer, which was to bring samadhi. And
Okay.
so if that, it depends why you're meditating. You know, each of the categories of practice kind of does something different for us and is focused on something different. So, you know, what a person's aspiration for their practice and why they're doing it would be part of the answer. So what is your reason for doing it and aspiration? That would help me you know, say something. You talked about samadhi, and if that's your main thing, then a concentration practice is going to cultivate that the most. But maybe there are other things that are important.
So when you say concentration practice, you mean choosing something to focus on?
Yeah, like the samatha in Theravada Buddhism, the Buddha gave 40 objects for samatha, not just the breath, but normally we start with the breath because it's already there. The others all require more effort. So it's already harder because there's more effort required with the other objects. But there's a specific way of doing the samatha that brings the mind stream together because it's a very small object. It's not changing much. And that is designed to cultivate concentration. It's a focused attention practice that cultivates concentration. So if samadhi is really what you're interested in, that's part of what that practice is for. You know, it's like saying, I want to have big muscles. Well, then you're going to do weight training. If you're saying, I want to really have my whole cardiovascular system be strong, then you're going to do running.
Okay.
So that would be the practice that's going to go directly to that. All of them will cultivate concentration, though. Vipassana cultivates concentration too, but it's really focused more on other things, on helping us be with whatever's present in the moment without getting caught up in getting attached to the pleasant, you know, rejecting the unpleasant and getting bored with neutral. Is a big part of what Vipassana is letting us do, is have equanimity no matter what is happening.
Are you saying Vipassana with the R, like R-A-P? I didn't know what.
No, Vipassana, which
Vipassana with the V?
Vipassana, which is insight meditation.
Okay.
You know, all the insight meditation centers around the US are mainly, they do now teach Samatha and the Brahma Viharas, most of them too, but they're mainly focused on Vipassana.
Got it. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, Feline. And thank you, Tina.
Sure.
Stephen, what you got?
Hi, Tina. Thanks for
Hi,
spending some
Stephen.
time with us tonight.
Sure.
Hi there.
My pleasure.
I was wondering if you feel comfortable sharing about the experiences that led to your interest in jhana practice and, you know, major emphasis on jhana practices.
Yeah, well, I did a year-long solo retreat. And when I was, you know, my practice had gotten to a certain level. I'd been doing month-long retreats for years, and my flame for awakening was extremely strong, also known as the enlightenment drive. And I had a teacher who did that, who just abandoned their life for a year and just practiced in silence for a year, basically. And so I became, so I did that. I arranged my life to do that, which was very risky because I am not wealthy and, you know, was self-employed and just had bought a condo and had a mortgage and such. So I did that, and I did all 4 categories of practice plus body-based, you know, a lot of yoga, qigong, pranayama, breathing, walking. No reading, no TV. I was in silence almost the whole year, other than a few times here and there. And a lot of amazing things happened during that year, as you can imagine. And one of the things that happened was there was a small group of us at Spirit Rock who were being taught concentration practices in this big sea of Vipassana people. And I was in that first group, for some years. And so my teacher really felt I should, after that what had happened had gone beyond really what the teachers that I was working with could help me with. And so he suggested that I go and study with Pa Auk Sayadaw, and Pa Auk happened to be doing a retreat in the US for 2 months, a year after I finished my solo retreat. And so I did that retreat, and that's when I, unknowing to me, I didn't know this was a big thing, that I was the first Western woman to complete all 8 jhanas. So that was not my main path at all. It was vipassana. I was really, during the year I did Samatha vipassana. Dzogchen was really my main umbrella. And I also did Samatha vipassana and the Brahma Viharas during the year. But that was what led to me doing that 2-month retreat. And I had no idea that people all over the world were going to want me to help them. I had a full-time job. I had no intention of becoming a Dharma teacher. So I really just started helping people because they wanted it. I had no aspiration to become a teacher or to teach Samatha, because Dzogchen was really my main practice, which includes, Dzogchen includes Samatha and Vipassana. So when you're doing Dzogchen, you're already doing Samatha and Vipassana. So so that's what really led to it. I don't see myself as a Samatha teacher. I see myself as a teacher of awakening, because that's what I'm passionate about, helping people with. But, there was a big gaping hole in the teaching for Samatha. There just weren't many people teaching in the Pa Auk lineage. There weren't people who had attained. I mean, there weren't, again, I didn't know this until after the retreat, that this was such a big deal. But I wanted to, I believe in Pa Auk scholarship. And if you look around, there's nobody who disputes his scholarship. And I just felt that what he was doing was that if people were interested, I would help them. So that's how I got into it. And I also, once I really understood, because I really was always a yogi. I wasn't a big reader about Buddhism, even though I have a PhD. I just wanted my experience to lead things. And once I started reading about it, I just thought, this is Pa Auk. He helped reintroduce the Samatha, which had been so neglected. And I just went, this is what the Buddha was teaching. How did this get excluded from Buddhism? It doesn't make any sense. So I felt like somehow my karma was just to take this. I didn't look for it, but I think it's important. And fortunately, one of my teachers, Guy Armstrong, he's the one who encouraged me to study with Pa Auk. He had been studying with Pa Auk and Tsoknyi Rinpoche. So, and it has gotten reestablished. Samatha has gotten reestablished in the last 20 years, which is kind of a miracle. Even though, like John said, there are places that say you don't need it and such. You can't say the Buddha didn't teach it anymore. So yeah, that's a little bit of my history with it.
That sounds like some serious traction right out of the gate with a year-long retreat. Do you have a book or something that you put this history in more depth?
No, I don't. I didn't really talk about myself much, but I mean, there is a little bit. This is my book with Stephen Snyder, Practicing the Jhanas. And it does talk some about he was also at the retreat, and we were married at the time. And we got out of there. He also completed the 8 jhanas. We got out of there, and it was like, now what? How do we integrate this? We had to go back to working full time, and monastics started contacting us, and that was why we wanted to help people. And so we were working full time for the first 7 years that we were teaching. So, cool. I mean, in regular jobs. So yeah, but no, my story, I've been interviewed a lot And so if you're interested in my story, you can find some of my interviews on my website that I've been asked more about that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, Tina. Thanks, Stephen. Graham, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, Tina. Thanks for being here.
Sure,
I'm
Graham.
mostly focusing on cultivating concentration. I've noticed it's pretty easy for me to sort of bring forward joy when I'm meditating. But I also have a lot of issues with striving, a lot of issues with striving. And I'm sort of wondering if the way, and when I bring forward joy, it makes the meditation easier for obvious reasons. But I'm kind of wondering if I'm having my hand in the pot, a little too much. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there is a way that concentration practices are about having one object to the exclusion of everything else. And so now if the objects become joy, and we're not with the breath or whatever, I mean, there are things that can arise in concentration practices that are pleasant, but we don't take those as the object. Because that is a byproduct of the mind stream becoming unified in such a way that we're not caught up in our hindrances and defilements, which block joy. So being with the breath, if that's the object, that is what is being free from our patterning, is part of what is causing the, it's a joy that isn't an emotion. It's a byproduct of the unification of mind. So unfortunately, we have words like joy or happiness that are part of what's called the jhana factors that sound like emotions, but they're not. They're actually byproducts of the mind stream being somewhat freer from the hindrances and defilements. So I would suggest, it's wonderful that you're having joy. I'm really happy to hear that. And if you take it, if you're doing vipassana to take it as the object, that's fine. That's what we're doing in vipassanas. We're investigating our experience, but if you're doing a concentration practice, you really want to stay with that object. Not that you have to ignore the joy, but you just don't make it the object. So that you are stirring the pot. The concentration's going to lessen if you're now taking different objects. I mean, that's really what we're cultivating in vipassana, is the ability to be with a lot of different things without getting caught up. I mean, one of the things we're cultivating. But in Samatha, what we're doing is we're really learning to turn away from everything that pulls us off, and joy could easily turn into the desire defilement, where now every time something that's more pleasant than the breath comes up, I'm going to leave because the breath is kind of neutral, or whatever. I'm making that up, but I would encourage you to, it's great that the joy's there, but just stay with your object. That's really what we're doing in concentration.
That's immensely helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, good. You're welcome.
Thanks, Graham. Thank you, Tina.
Sure.
Eve, go for it.
I appreciate you coming tonight, and it's been very interesting hearing other people's questions, and it's kind of keeps changing my question as I'm hearing other people's questions and like your answers to them, and I was like, oh, okay, that's like answering that part of mine. But I guess my question sort of back to like a basic understanding of the relationship you have to the breath, but I'm asking myself like why I meditate. I want to feel completely settled within, and like be able to accept all my experiences, be able to process, integrate them, to be okay with everything that I've been through in my life, and to be able to like feel very comfortable just sitting with all of it and being with all of it and not trying to stop it. But like let go of the resistance, to all of whatever I am or who I am. And And so like this idea of being with the breath through some kind of mystery where we can't, or where it's like this like place that goes beyond our conscious comprehension sounds very interesting to me. Like I like the way you said that earlier. But where I get a little bit lost is I don't understand where the breath would go away from the body, like where we would think about the breath in a way that would separate it all from the body. And I'm wondering if maybe I'm misunderstanding. That's just something I've always struggled with meditation or Buddhism, or like there's just that conversation period. I'm like, I want to be in my body. Like I want to be embracing all of it. Like
Yeah.
so I don't get that. That's something I really like. That's something
Sure. Yeah. And just to clarify one thing, we aren't, when we're orienting to the mystery, we aren't going beyond something that we can't be conscious of. The whole idea with the spiritual path is that we can actually be conscious of our deeper nature.
Right. Okay.
And our deeper nature is beyond the conditions of the physical things that arise. Anything that's going to pass away is conditioned. Our personalities, our bodies, everything in the physical world, all of that is subject to conditions that are going to pass away. They arise and they pass away. That's conditioned. But there is a deeper nature that we are that is unconditioned, that isn't subject to that arising and passing. And the whole, I mean, the Buddha saying, look, you can see this for yourself. Don't take my word for it. He was saying we can all know that. The potential is that we can know that. And once we know that deeper nature that is indestructible, that's beyond all that, Eastern traditions tend to see it as emptiness, Western see it as unity, but people from both traditions can have both experiences. That gives us a peace, that is the peace that passes all understanding. So that is what we're orienting to, that's beyond the conditions. And in Samatha, that's really what we're pointing to, that through the breath. So right now, one of the things that we know about somebody who's died is that, how do we know? They're not breathing. So how the fact that we're both sitting here breathing is a mystery. 10 minutes after this ends, one of us could not be breathing. So there's just the fact that your breath is arising from that ground and keeping you alive is in itself, it goes all the way back to the unconditioned, because the breath coming and going is a mystery if we know it deeply enough. So
okay.
that is how the breath can take us there. The breath can also, if we're using vipassana, which it sounds like you're more inclined to vipassana practice, and that's great. We're investigating, we're getting to know everything, we're welcome everything. Whatever's arising, we see if we can let it be there without getting attached to the pleasant, to when then we suffer when the pleasant goes away, without having to push away the unpleasant, just getting used to going, okay, I can be with this unpleasant thing. I know eventually it'll subside. And with the neutral, which has gotten a lot more important now that we're constantly entertained with our phones, if things are neutral, do I find that I'm restless? Do I find I have to find something more interesting to entertain myself, or can I be okay when things are neutral? So that's really that's part of, in Vipassana, we're investigating our experience just as it is without meddling with it, just letting it arise on its own and really being there for it. And so that sounds like what you're really interested in. And welcoming all of it. And ultimately, the potential is that we can know our deeper nature without it ever moving. I mean, this is awakening, but we can know and abide in our deeper nature while all these things are going on at the surface without leaving our deeper nature. So we don't have to, it's not an either or anymore.
Right.
Yeah, so that's part of what you're cultivating by really letting things arise, and knowing them is being really present for and okay with the human condition, and also maybe knowing what is beyond that. that you are right now, even with all these things arising. I mean, everything that's happening right now is arising from that ground. So if we know that deeply enough, we're going to know the ground that is that settled place that's always present.
Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, Eve. Thank you, Tina.
Sure.
So I'm gonna throw it over to Chappelle and Monica in a second, but first, just a couple quick things. One is, I'm gonna give it until the end of, I don't know if it's Chappelle or Monica are both asking their question, but whoever it is, until the end of their question, if you have a question, put your hand up. Otherwise, once they're done asking their question, I'm going to open it up, or we'll consider it open to people who have already asked a question if they want to ask a second one. All right, so don't do that until Chappelle and or Monica are done, but once they're done, consider it open season for people who have already asked a question to ask another one if they want. If no one has questions at all, including second ones, I might ask a question, and then, or maybe we'll just let Tina get back to her life a little early. So Chappelle and or Monica, would you like to ask your question?
Hey, yes, thanks, John. Thanks, Tina.
It's Monica. All right.
We actually both have questions.
Oh, okay.
That's okay.
Hi. Yeah, I really appreciated your pointing to Eve just now. I definitely was able to fill into that more. So thank you for all your answers tonight. I also like how we've been comparing the different practices to different sports trainings, because like I am an athlete, but also there's like, I feel like it's a good balance between setting goals and aiming towards something, like pushing ourselves, but also being able to relax while we're doing the practice, in order to, cultivate the joy and all the concentration factors in the practice. So my question is, like, if you could prescribe like a weekly training scenario or schedule, knowing that I have this retreat in the summertime that I'm going to go focusing on jhana and on concentration, like that would be like my marathon day, right? But I'm really busy during the day right now, and I want to work my way up towards doing jhana and ultimately for awakening. So just wondering if you have any like guidelines or like a training schedule that you would recommend to people.
Yeah, when people are coming to my longer retreats, I encourage them to, do, to me, a good householder amount of practice for every day is 30 minutes. It's not a lot compared to a monastic amount, but for householders, I think if a person can do that consistently, that's great. And I do believe in meditating every day. So, and then as you get close to the retreat, if you can work up your time to an hour or even 2 hours right before the retreat, then you're coming into the retreat already kind of primed, and you can use the retreat. You're not starting sort of cold coming into the retreat. So I really think, even just 2 weeks before, if you start ramping up your practice, that it can make a difference of coming in already a little bit warmed up. That would be my suggestion. Yeah, I mean, you don't really need to do it months ahead of time. If you can, that's great. But if you ramp up right before the retreat, that is the most helpful, in my opinion. And it does help, I think. I've seen that when people can come in and they're coming in able to sit longer without a lot of fidgeting and such, it just accelerates the practice. Yeah, have a great retreat. Yeah.
Thanks, Monica. Thank you, Tina. Chappelle's got a question too, so we're going to bring him back up in a second. But
okay.
First, there was a private question asked me, so maybe we can like blitz both of these questions, and then I think we'll probably be at the end. I see people are still putting hands up, and I'm so sorry for anyone that we can't get to. I know that I was like, oh, if we run out of questions, but that turned out to be a naive concern. So here is the question that was sent to me. Could you discuss the relationship between the completion of the jhanas, full enlightenment or awakening, and non-duality? is the mix of the 4 practices you outlined the speediest track for those of us with the enlightenment drive?
Yeah, so the jhanas are non-dual states, just like Rigpa is in Dzogchen and other non-dual states, which is mostly what awakening is pointing to. So they're cultivated through concentration. Other non-dual states, like in Dzogchen with the Rigpa, it's done in a different way. So all 4 practices can lead to non-duality in different ways. Ultimately, the self-transcending category practice is the most, it's kind of usually the last one we do after the others. At least 1 or 2 of the others are more well established. I don't recommend trying to go straight to a self-transcending practice like Dzogchen. Or even in Zen, trying to realize, non-duality without some stability. It just doesn't happen that easily. So that's how the jhanas relate. But there are a lot of ways to realize non-duality. Jhanas is just one way. But it's stable. That's one of the advantages of it. And then how does it relate to awakening? Was that the second part?
It was, I think it was, what's the relationship between jhanas
and awakening
and non-duality?
And non-duality, yes.
And is a mix of the 4 practices the speediest track?
Yeah. Well, and so in the Hindu tradition, and when the Buddha was alive, it was thought that the jhanas, and there is potentially a way for awakening to arise from that. And that's part of how they saw it then. And it's still kind of a hidden thing in Buddhism, the infamous 9th jhana, But in the Hindu tradition, it's considered awakening. So from that perspective, doing all of the jhanas is considered awakening. In the Theravada Buddhism, doing vipassana leading to cessation is considered technically the path to awakening, although I know a lot of vipassana teachers who have had other kinds of awakenings, not the classic Theravada 8 stages kind. And then non-duality is a common factor amongst all of them. And if you look at all traditions, when unity, that's talked about more in the Western traditions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, is just the other side of the coin of emptiness. But they're all talking about merging with the divine. Even if there's a deity, there's still a non-duality that's seen in the mystical traditions of that. So that's non-duality is when, as John was saying, the subject-object split collapses, or another way of talking about it that I really like is if the ego self goes dormant. But there's a sense of being, not having any boundaries, and a boundless also sensation of what we are. And then the 4 practices, any one of the categories can lead to awakening. So you don't have to do all 4, but I think it's really interesting that Dzogchen and the 4 heart-based, which includes bodhicitta, the aspiration for awakening for the benefit of all beings, or the Brahma Viharas, the heart practices, and both Theravada and Tibetan Buddhism, focused attention, which is the Samatha, concentration and serenity, open monitoring, which is vipassana or shikantaza in Zen, and then self-transcending practices, which include Dzogchen, the Rigpa stage of the practice, or a lot of Zen practices are self-transcending, Mahamudra, Chitta Nupassana, and Theravada. That's the closest we have. So those are the categories. Any one of those can lead to awakening, but I think that for a person to really have a well-rounded, the heart practices purify the heart. The Samatha purifies the consciousness, Vipassana purifies our experience and our view, and then the self-transcending lets you live from it. So they all sound pretty good to me.
Yeah, cool. Man, okay. So can you give a 2-minute answer to a 30-second question? What do you think?
Well, I could try. We can see
All
what
right.
it is.
Okay. Chappelle, trusting you to give us the Micro Machines Man version. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like, Tina, you said a lot there. I think you like answered a lot of the question already. I was just particularly interested in like a heart awakening. Like, I've heard that term before, but I'm not sure like what that means. Like, people talk about like waking up in the head and the heart and the gut, but it's still
Right. Yeah, there's the 3 centers, and a lot of awakenings are just head, and then you can see some bad behavior happening. Yeah, there's an embodiment. I'm huge on embodiment. And in some ways, I know this may not be encouraging, but awakening is really easy compared to embodiment. Living from it and really, working all that material that keeps us either in our ego self, because there are stages to awakening. Awakening doesn't just happen and then we're fully enlightened. There's stages. Every tradition has stages. So that is really where, to me, the embodiment work comes from, is working all of the places where we're still identified with the ego self, and then living from it, functioning from it. That's a long journey, but it's so amazing to have our practice come off the cushion and be lived, and to be able, this is another great thing about like open-eyed practices like Dzogchen, is we can learn how to take the non-duality off the cushion and function from it. There's a lot of stuff to work through, to include your least favorite politician in the unity, So that's really, to me, that's our potential as humans, is to not only be able to have those realizations on the cushion, but to function from that. It's really a beautiful potential that we all have because of our Buddha nature. We all have the potential for that inherently. It's our birthright. So I'm really happy that all of you are practicing, and somewhere along that journey, whether it's you're new or whether you're experienced, I can't imagine any better way to spend one's life, and in my opinion, many lifetimes, than awakening for the benefit of all beings. Imagine what the planet would be like if everybody had even a taste of awakening. It'd be a paradise. So that's the potential. Did I end on time? Oh,
yeah, you nailed it. Thank you, Chappelle. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
And,
thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Tina. So quick wrap up, because we're at the end, though. Again, man, we really held the audience. You really held the audience, I should say. So Tina, thank you.
Oh, thanks for the invitation, John.
It was my absolute pleasure. I'm so glad that you were able to join us. I want to apologize to anyone whose questions we weren't able to reach. Sorry about that, but please keep coming to sessions like this. We have other wonderful teachers joining us. So that's it. Are there any final things that you want to say, Tina, before we say goodnight?
No, just many blessings to all of you on your journey of liberation and living a more free life. And I really, I bow to your practice.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night. See you next time.